They always want to hang out when I'm doing a live, so it's always kind of a kitty for the beginning of the live before we get into things. Okay, they're actually all over here wanting attention. Okay, okay. All right. So my last live did not go super well, whether it was the wind or just technical difficulties. So I'm just gonna kind of redo that live. And so the last live, I was talking about the stacking method. And I use the stacking method essentially to decide what I want to do or bring onto the homestead. I think this really helps kind of develop the idea of what to expect, but also to not build up too quickly with things that may not be necessary, at least in the beginning. Because something that I see a lot happen with people who go off grid or start a homestead is they pile on a lot onto their plate at once, and they end up getting pretty frustrated and just overwhelmed by all the things they have going on the homestead, especially if you're trying to work a 9 to 5 while homesteading can really be tricky to figure out how to balance things out. But the stacking method is essentially a method of kind of like a pros and cons list when it comes to what you're going to bring onto the homestead. So like a good example is chickens. So say you're just starting off on your homestead, and depending on how you do things, like for us, we start living in a tent and we build up until we have somewhere to live, and kind of in between those times, we're bringing things onto the homestead like chickens. It's kind of what we did the first time. We had chickens while we built up and learned kind of how to take care of those chickens, slowly built up the flock. And so for chickens, the way I was like, okay, so do I want to bring chickens onto the homestead? And the main reason I want chickens is because I love birds. So we're gonna have, so if you have like a list, you have chickens at the bottom, and we're gonna stack all the things that, the pros and cons list. Essentially, it's a pros list, and then you make kind of a stack of a cons list. So the pros of raising chickens, of course, is going to be food. And for us personally, that is kind of what these lists are. It is more a personalized stacking list. So chickens, it's food, and kind of like a sub stack is not only food for us, but for the cats and the dogs. And then the second stack would be eggs. So when I say food, I think meat. And then they also provide eggs. So there's a second stack. The third stack would be maybe their great pest control. So they help keep the area clear of bugs. So there's a third stack. A fourth stack would be that you get fertilizer from them. So they're fertilizing the land. And you could stack, say that they're just fun and entertaining could be a stack. The fact that they till the ground, all their scratching and pecking, you could add that to a stack. The aspect of being able to hatch and sell chicks for income, there's another stack. And so we have a pretty nice pros list, and it's not so much a cons list. Like, I don't want to not think of the cons list as negative so much, but it's just kind of the flip side of owning chickens. So for example, they're kind of expensive. People think that, having chickens makes it cheaper than buying eggs, which I know many of us find out the hard way that that is not the case. They can be very expensive. Whether you're in the sense of like buying the coop, their feed, just regular maintenance, expenses. And then the second stack in kind of the cons list would be like vet care, which is also kind of part of the expense thing, but it's also just any animal you have comes with possible vet needs, whether they get hurt or they get sick. And not only those aspects of the vet, but that it can be hard to find a vet for chickens. And so, you know, you have your pros stack, and then you have these cons stack. And then just like any pro and cons list, you kind of decide whether you would want chickens or not. And for me, the pros far outweigh any of the kind of flip side cons. And even though, and that kind of depends on the person too. Some people are going to think that, you know, maybe the vet care aspect, you know, they themselves don't want to have to do certain types of vet things, because many people who raise animals, they do certain types of what you would consider vet care themselves, whether it's because they just have the knowledge or that there is no vet close enough. So some people, they're like, oh, the vet issue, that makes all the other reasons to have chickens, you know, I don't want chickens because of that one con. And that's okay. And part of some of those pros and cons, you do kind of learn along the way. For example, you might find you like ducks better. You know, the way they stack, their pros and cons are better for you personally. Or the flip side, you know, whether you want chickens or ducks, you can stack those, what uses they have, what reasons do you have them for. Like maybe some people just want ducks so they can help not keep the pond clean, because ducks make quite a mess in a pond, but they do help with the natural cycles in certain ponds. You know, you have ducks and fish, and if you have life in that pond, it brings more life, and kind of that aspect. There's other aspects of, say, space. You know, I think in a sense, if you have ducks with a pond, that's a lot of space. So you're like, okay, I want chickens with a coop instead, because I don't have to deal with water when it comes to ducks. So like if you're stacking ducks, you know, you get meat, you get eggs. They also are good bug control. They're less damaging on lawns, not by a ton, but they are. And then on the con side, it would be they're super messy, and, you know, they need a lot more constant water than, say, chickens. And you'd use those two lists to decide if you want chickens or ducks. And these lists really depend on the person, on your goals, and kind of what you're hoping to achieve out of having these animals. And I guess in a sense, you know, another kind of con point with chickens would be that they're only going to lay so much and so long during the year, because they go through molt in the fall, and then it gets cold, and then they stop laying for winter, and then, you know, spring comes around and they lay, but then they might go broody. So there's kind of those little nuance stacks with chickens in that sense that you need to think about. So if you want chickens like 4 eggs, and that's kind of the main thing, you might have to supplement light, make sure they're getting like extra proteins and things like that, so that they lay through the winter for you. So that could be a pro or a con, depending on, you know, your personal preference. Like, you know, is it a problem that they need that extra light? And that could be because you're off grid on solar, so you don't have the energy requirements to supplement them light during the winter. So essentially a lot of chickens are freeloaders during the winter. So it's stacking the pros and cons and weighing them properly so that you know what you're expecting when it comes to what you get out of the animal. And I guess another good example would be, a lot of people wonder why we don't have a cow. For us, a cow does not stack, because so a cow is meat. And that's like the main reason, or milk and meat, you would have a cow. What are you doing? You're distracting me. So with a cow, it's meat and then milk. But when it comes to having such a large animal to raise, when it comes to a cow, because it's so big, not only do you need all the things to just basically raise a cow, but if this cow is less than very handleable, you might need a head catch to be able to work on their feet, to maybe pluck porcupine quills out of their face. When they have babies, you have to know what you're kind of doing when they're having babies, you know, kind of that vet aspect. Like, it can be really hard to have a really big animal who's giving birth, you're having problems, and it's that detrimental point where either you have to intervene right now, because the longer it takes to intervene, the most likely you are to lose the mom or the baby. And in a kind of comparison way, you know, chickens are a little bit easier in the breeding sense because you can just hatch a whole bunch of eggs. Like, of course, chickens do have problems sometimes when it comes to laying eggs, but that's kind of with any animal. There's always a probability of some sort of issue. But it's, you know, a cow doesn't work for us because we need big equipment. We need big space, we need big water, big food. And if you were to say compare it to a goat, like, I can wrestle a goat to be able to take care of a hoof problem, or to check their teeth, or to help them have a baby. With a cow, you can't do that. They're harder to handle because they're just big animals. And of course, the more you work with the animal, the easier some of those issues become. But some people don't have time to have a very handleable animal, if that makes sense. Some people want them to be more pet-like, and some of them it is more that just kind of wild livestock sort of kind of aspect. So for us, a cow doesn't stack simply because they're so big. And when we go to harvest a cow, that's a lot of meat to need to be able to properly cure and store and preserve. And I do not have the freezer space. I don't think I would even have enough jars for a whole cow to can up even enough to make a difference. Versus for us, a goat, that when we harvest a goat, that's not too much meat. I can handle working with all of that meat in a shorter time span. Like, you know, if I had a really nice meat fridge, you know, I could work the cow slowly until it was all preserved. And a goat, I can do that pretty quickly. It only takes a few days for me to be able to turn some into jerky and burger or steaks and freeze it or can it. And like for us, a goat, it stacks better. It makes more sense for us, because like another stacking con with a cow is it's also a lot of milk. So even if we wanted a cow for just milk, that is a ton of milk that you have to be constantly cycling through, figuring out what to do with it. Versus a goat. A goat gives us just enough that we have the milk that we need kind of on a day-to-day basis when we do have a goat in milk. Got a couple of comments. Thank you for subbing, Nicole, or Noble. Thank you for subbing, Noble. I appreciate it. JS, hello from Texas. Good to see you. Thank you for joining the live today. The week went pretty well. It was pretty nice. The cows have been a bit of a nuisance, but otherwise it's been very nice and not too hot. She is a very cute cat. She's always obnoxious, though. She is my little terrier kitty. All right, so going back to stacking, I think that when you think of certain animals in this stacking function, you know, what it takes, you know, the input you're going to give versus the output they give, it's very important to really kind of calculate those aspects so that when you start raising these animals, you don't get kind of frustrated with the fact that you might not be getting exactly what you wanted. Kind of an example is a lot of people think that a chicken lays an egg every single day. So if you have 10 chickens, every day you're going to get 10 eggs. And that's not the case. A chicken can take 24 to 48 hours, depending on the breed, to lay an egg. So you might have 10 chickens, but you're only getting between maybe 5 and 8 eggs a day, which is actually pretty good. You know, you have some chickens that will lay closer to every day, and then like, you know, Easter eggers tend to lay more every other day. So if you kind of come in with it with the idea that I'm going to get 10 eggs a day, and that's what you're banking on, and then you kind of realize that that's not quite what you get, which is part of kind of the learning curve, but also the need to understand the animals you're going to bring onto the homestead before you do so. Because, like, for example, if you had no idea that a chicken doesn't lay an egg every day, and you say, okay, I need this many eggs every week, and you get as many chickens as you need for that, you may like get frustrated at the fact that you're coming up short. And it's not like lowering expectations, but it's kind of being realistic in the sense, because it can be a bummer, especially the whole, having chickens is cheaper than buying eggs. That's not, it is the opposite. But there's certain ways that you can make it so it is just about cheaper when it comes to rotationally grazing. You can raise bugs, raise fodder, kitchen scraps, whatever free range, whatever stuff they get with free ranging can help with those costs. But kind of overall, chickens are a little bit more expensive than eggs. And it's kind of the same thing with just my experiences and also meeting people and the experiences they have shared. A lot of people miss the fact on how big animals are to work with. So for the stacking method, size is very important for me to think about, because if it's a very large animal, that's just a large animal. They're big, they eat a lot, they drink a lot, they can be more destructive, they can be more dangerous. And having the infrastructure to deal with those big animals can also be very expensive. Like if you want cows and horses, you need to make sure you have proper fences and paddocks to keep them safe, to keep them where they're supposed to be. And I mean, it even goes for things like cats. Like you can stack a cat and how important they may be to the homestead. And for us, they're actually super important because it is infested out here with mice and especially pack rats. And we don't want to, we're not a poison people. We don't like to poison things because it moves up the food chain. It's not good. The environment out here is just super out of whack. The lack of either the flying predators or the four-legged predators is really lacking than what it did in the past. And there's a lot of different ways that you can help curb mice populations, but out here, and what we've discovered being off-grid, cats are the best way to deal with those problems, because if we're trying to bring back the nature, mice are super destructive because they're going to eat all the seeds, they're going to eat all the seedlings, they're going to they destroy things very thoroughly. And for us, cats have been the best answer because it's as natural of, cats are a natural rodent poison, but they eat it too. So it helps feed the cats and it helps the rodent population. And like, in a sense, cats kind of stack funny because they're also a pain in the butt. You don't want them to eat the birds and the lizards, and we're pretty lucky that our cats really aren't interested. There's enough mice. There's enough mice here. They don't have as much interest in anything else. So we're grateful for that, because that can be kind of the cons stack to a cat is, they're going to eat birds and they're going to eat lizards, and we don't want that to happen. But how we do kind of avoid that is we have bird feeders away from where the cats usually are. We have lots of places for the snakes or the lizards to run and hide. And we also, if the cats are chasing a lizard, we try to correct them. And not that it does a lot, but they don't like the lizards as much anymore. Like, it's just a spray bottle. If we see them playing with a lizard, they get sprayed, and they have went a lot more away from the lizards. But cats are kind of a pain. They poop in your gardens. They need constant attention. So kind of depending on some of those things, cats can stack differently for different people, but also cats are great companions. They're adorable. They help lift your spirits. So those could be on the pros stack. And for us, even though cats are little terrors, they're super important for our homestead and what we're trying to accomplish. Because if we didn't have the cats, we'd still have this very large mouse issue, and we probably wouldn't be growing as much stuff because the mice would get to it first. Got a comment, JS, that's a great point about not being cheaper owning chickens than buying eggs at the store. I think it's a misconception. It really is. It's kind of that funny thing that social media has really kind of warped the idea of what homesteading is. and not so much what it is, but what it takes to at least initially get things going. There's kind of the social media joke that it's, you know, it's $1,000 egg when you get your first chicken egg, because you've probably spent over $1,000 to get those chickens to that point of laying eggs. And it's kind of the same thing with the whole homesteading idea and building up. Because everyone's going to be different. Things get really chaotic. There's this harsh learning curve. Like, you can read all you want about raising chickens. You can do all the book learning, but once you get into actually raising the chickens, you'll find out that it's a whole other deal. It's like the book learning gets you going. You got a stable footing, but the actual hands-on doing the chicken raising is super different. And I feel that that's definitely a disconnect between kind of social media and reality, is that this isn't some super easy lifestyle. Like, it definitely can be if you have I just think you need a lot of money. Like, in a general sense, like, you want to be like super set up, things are easy, is being able to put down a lot of money to get stuff built like perfect, to have everything set up like super perfect, or buy a homestead that's already set up. But it's like this huge process of learning, and sometimes that learning curve is really rough because, you know, I can't remember if I talked about this in the last live or the one before, but we really don't distinguish between pets and livestock. And not that livestock can't be a pet, they totally can, but the raising of them is very different. The interaction, it can be very much the same, but you know, with a cat, you're not having a cat who lays an egg every day and that, you know, does these other things that you have to be mindful of and watch. Like, because with a chicken that's laying eggs, you know, they can have eggs that break inside of them. They can have prolapses. They can be egg bound. And just kind of those kinds of aspects. There's like the livestock aspect that's really forgotten, because we've had just kind of pets for so long that, like, I mean, a cow can be a pet, but at the same time, this pet could almost eat you if it got ornery enough. And that it's so much harder to really work. It can be harder to work with livestock versus a pet. And when we think that, you know, there's people who will buy chicks and like 2 months later are wondering why they're not laying eggs. It's because it takes like a year for those chickens to actually lay eggs. So we're really disconnected from, I guess, kind of nature and animals in general. And we don't quite understand what it takes to be very successful in certain aspects of homesteading, especially when it comes to raising animals. And especially like double time if you're trying to breed them. Breeding animals can be really hard because not only are you taking care of this animal who's pregnant, but there's a lot of things that can happen that if you don't have a vet who knows how to deal with, say, a cow, you know, they can cats and dogs all day, but a cow might be very different from them. And if you don't have the knowledge and they don't have the knowledge, goodness, you can, you know, you can have those kinds of issues where homesteading is one of those things where you almost have to do the thing to know how to do the thing. So like for a cow who has a stuck baby, like, you just have to kind of do the thing and be able to reach in there and help the mama. Like, it's always nice when you have a vet to either help you, show you, you have someone who knows about it to help you. But it's not until you actually do the thing, do you know how to do the thing. Because, like, the first time I helped pull a baby goat, that was the first time I'd ever done it. I was very knowledgeable on how to, watching videos, reading about it, etc. But actually going and doing it was, like, kind of weird and crazy because it's still not exactly what you expect. But, you know, having the book learning is always good, but it's doing the actual thing that can be pretty crazy and can really it's like an enlightening moment when you realize like, wow, okay, I can learn all this stuff about these animals, but I really have no idea because I've never actually worked with that animal. JS, I research almost everything before jumping into it. It seems like the actual doing and homesteading is the real teacher. It really is. And I think that's the hard lesson for a lot of people who want to do off-grid and homesteading, is that it's the actual doing of it. Like, you actually have to do it to learn how to do it. And part of that is the acclimation process of being off-grid or homesteading, because a lot of people aren't sure like what the difference between off-grid and homesteading is. You know, homesteading, I guess this might be a little more opinionated, but homesteading is where you're trying to raise animals and grow food to support your family in whatever fashion. It doesn't have to be like 100%. But, you know, homesteading is raising your animals and growing food for the family to be a little bit more self-sustainable in that sense. Whereas off-grid, you can be off-grid and not homestead. You can have a little off-grid cabin and not a chicken in 100 miles. But then you can combine the two. You can do the off-grid homesteading. And I definitely think the combined homestead off-grid is kind of the hardest, especially if you're not familiar with either. Like, if you've never homestead and you've never went off-grid, and you try to bring those together and do an off-grid homestead, again, if you don't have like a ton of money to get everything set up at once, that can be really rough, because when you're acclimating to being off-grid, you know, thinking about how much water you're using, how much electricity you're using, those kinds of things. And then you bring in animals and gardens and maybe incubators for hatching. It's a lot to learn kind of at once, if that makes sense, because that's what we did. We went off-grid and started a homestead. And we built up very slowly, though, too. I think that was the biggest benefit, was we used the stacking method, what is worth it and what is not worth it for where we are in our homesteading off-grid journey, and deciding how much to bring in, the learning curve that comes with whatever we're bringing in, and that slow build up. So it's like, I wasn't able to have an incubator until we built up our solar system enough to handle an incubator. That kind of build up aspect. And then once I was able to hatch chickens, I had a lot of chickens. But you also have to be careful not to have too much where you get overwhelmed, because sometimes you get so overwhelmed you don't want to do it anymore. And like, I think that happens no matter what, because sometimes I get frustrated and I tell everybody is going into the freezer and no more animals. I'm done with this nonsense. But it's just like, just for a minute. Sometimes you just got to kind of get like really frustrated for a second and feel all the feels, and then woosah, and then everything's good. But like, that's kind of what it is. If you're someone who is familiar with like working with cows, growing up on a ranch, like, working with cows can be so frustrating. I mean, I have like some of the most frustrated people and like red-faced tomato head I've ever seen is a rancher who's frustrated at cows. And so that's another reason I don't want cows. They're big, they're silly, they're destructive. That's why I like goats. Even though they're still kind of destructive, they're not as big. I can wrestle them for, you know, health checks and dealing with their hooves and stuff. But I mean, sometimes I am done with the goats. I am over it. But then I look at my cute goats and I still want them. So sometimes it is kind of you just got to persevere through those negative things, because in reality, the positive that comes out of it is much better. Because just raising animals and being able to feed my animals and us, you know, healthy meat, the little bit that I can get out of the garden, you know, that is worth it overall. Like, some people don't need a stacking method. Some people go, okay, I want to feed my family. So it doesn't really matter so much. Like, you get chickens, okay? It doesn't matter that they lay eggs or that they fertilize. It's the fact that they can feed my family. That is the one and done deal that makes it worth it to them to have chickens. Same thing with if you want goats or raising a cow for milk. You're like, I get to give my family fresh milk every day. That makes this cow totally worth it. No matter what I have to deal with this cow or this cat, they're totally worth it. And it's really kind of the development of not only the skill, the knowledge, but just kind of the understanding that we are working with animals. There has been a very deep humanization of animals, which, like, I mean, I kind of do the same thing. Like, you know, this kitty here is my little baby, and like whatever she needs, she can sit here and eat my hair all day and poke me, and it's just fine. But there is the oh no, you distracted me, little cat. There's the need though so there's the need to understand that while yes, animals they have emotions, they have feelings, they have these things, it's still different than how we as humans perceive those things. Like, trying to think like the best way to describe it. You know, animals are more on the primal sense. They know you give food, you give shelter, you give safety, you give scratches and love and cuddles. And we perceive that as this animal loves us. And it's true, in their own way they do, but at the same time it's instinct. Their instincts tell us that, oh, this is the way things kind of are and go, and this is my person. You know, their feelings are more instinctual based. And I think that's why we can get so frustrated with animals, because we can't understand why they do this thing. Like, for example, every now and again we have a goat who's an escape artist, and she goes out on a tether for a little while until we can fix the escapism. But she does this thing where she'll twist around one little stick. It'll be this one little stick sticking up, and she'll twist around it and get all tangled. And it's silly to me why she just doesn't twist around the other way a couple of times to untangle herself. And so, and when I say that in the sense of, I think that that's where some of the disconnect is with how hard it is for us to raise some animals, is we can't understand why animals do things the way they do, because we've humanized them very much. And like, to me, it's a positive negative thing, because it can cause a lot of stress for some people. Like, why doesn't this animal understand why I need it to do this thing? And it's because they don't think like that. They're animals. They're gonna do what they want, essentially. And we essentially have to create fences and borders and boundaries to keep them from doing whatever they want, because we need them to do just a little less of whatever they want. And it can be very frustrating to just people that I've worked with. They don't understand why this goat keeps doing this thing, and it's because it's an animal. It does not know any better. You can't put them on the same kind of thinking train as us, because there is that whatever cognitive difference between us and an animal, where they don't understand things the same way we do, or that we think they should. And that's a huge learning curve for people sometimes, is learning how to work with the animal and with what they understand as kind of the way of the world. You know, if you have this bird that just wants to roost in a tree and you just can't stop it, sometimes you just let that bird roost in a tree. And it sometimes sucks because that's the one that gets eaten. But in a sense, it was its fault, and you don't want it to teach any other birds to like roost in the tree. Silly example, but if that makes sense. Gonna read some comments. JS, like wrestling goats, exactly. Marco, sounds like a lot of work to me. You know, it is and it isn't. It really kind of depends on the individual person. The homesteading off-grid life for us is our lifestyle. It is our life. It is our work. It is our fun. It is the annoying entertainment in that sense. So like, sure, it's a lot of work, but it's kind of that thing, if you love what you do, it's not work. And that is what homesteading and our lifestyle is for us. So sometimes it is a lot of work. I mean, that not saying it's not, like it is, because sometimes one of the struggles with sharing the work and projects we do is, like, you know, I have these time lapses. You don't see when I need a break or when I get frustrated about something, like during a time of the project. I definitely try to talk about it, but you know, some people are like, oh, it looks so easy. And then they go to try to do it and they go, oh my gosh, that was actually really hard to do. And so I never want to make it seem easier than it is, but I also think that it's how much you love doing it makes it easy, if that makes sense. Like, you know, doing all the rock and mud work that I have done, it's like really hard work, but it's really not work because I love to do it. So I think that really helps when it comes to anybody's lifestyle and whoever wants to do whatever they want to do. The more you love it, the less actual work it is, if that makes sense. um, um, I have 6 acres, 7 miles off road in northeastern Arizona. I look forward to moving to. Oh, that's super awesome. We're also in northern Arizona. We like it up here. We like it up here a whole lot. Great people, great community. It doesn't get as hot as down south, so that's been a huge bonus. But I super hope you're able to move there super soon and start your Arizona journey with all of us other newish Arizona folks. I am most intimidated about raising animals as it's the biggest responsibility I feel of all the to-dos. It's very true. That is, in a sense, the most intimidating part is the care for the animals. It's, you know, almost don't see it as like, you know, maybe not don't, but maybe think of it differently. Instead of intimidating, it's a lot of learning that you want to be very receptive to. And, you know, everybody has tips and tricks and ideas for people, and definitely listen to those, but always do what you think is best with the knowledge you have gained. You know, don't assume things, I guess. You know, it's taking lots of knowledge from lots of different places and putting them together and doing what you feel is best. And that will definitely help you with the learning curve of raising animals, with the responsibilities, but it's also starting out small. You know, if you want to raise animals, I think I talked about this in my other live. I personally think that the best place to start with like a homesteading or raising animals journey is either ducks or chickens. And the only problem with ducks is they're super messy and they poop everywhere. And they're waterfowl, so they make super big messes with their water. But ducks and chickens I think are really great because, and just a few at a time. You don't want to get like 100 chickens and to start off with, but just like 5, maybe 10. Because I think they'll help give you a really good idea of what it takes, but also they're a little less maintenance in certain ways than say like goats are. Because with chickens, you can have them in a coop and a run, and that can be where they live. You know, depending on where you are, predators, etc., you might be able to free range and that kind of thing. But I feel like chickens are a little less needy in certain aspects. I definitely think they're a great place to start, but I mean, shoot, you could start with just like a pet bunny in that sense. And, you know, you work your way up with your understanding. Okay, so chickens, you know, I need to be out there at, you know, at least this time every morning, food and water. You want to learn how to check their health and what to look for with like health issues. And just kind of becoming familiar with what you need to know about one animal, because that's going to translate pretty much exactly the same to the next animal. Like something that I see a lot of people struggle with when it comes to raising animals is they don't understand that, like, if you have like my chickens, I have to look at their bum, down their throat, you know, looking, checking in their mouth, check under all their feathers. I have to know what a healthy vent looks like, what healthy foot scales look like, what healthy skin looks like, being familiar with their ailments, as well as kind of like specific dietary needs that some animals may have versus others. Because once you like, okay, I need to know what healthy butts look like, healthy mouths, healthy feet look like. That's going to translate over to a goat. But it's harder to check those things on a goat, you know, and then same thing with a cow. You know, as the animal gets bigger, those basic needs and know-hows, like you can know what a healthy goat bum looks like, but actually getting a look at that healthy goat bum might be hard to do. So starting small and understanding what you need to do to take care of a smaller animal pretty much translates up the way, except that it's bigger and they eat more and they need more space. And it's just the learning curve, you know, like for me, it's don't be intimidated, just be as knowledgeable as you can before you get into it. And that'll help the journey a whole lot. Um, Cool beans. Lots of dwarf goats out there in New Mexico. Might have to grab a few. I love dwarf goats. They're so cute, but they don't stack for us. They're a little small. I need goats that are a little bit bigger. I grew up with horses, riding ponies, and then horses. I grew up with horses, riding ponies, then horses. Okay, heck yes. I didn't exactly grow up like with horses, but I grew up on a ranch that had horses and I'd ride them sometimes. And like friends had horses. I've always like kind of wanted a horse, but I think I actually want like a big ox that I'll learn how to like teach it how to be ridden and that kind of thing. I'd rather an ox than a horse because an ox would stack better because either that or maybe just a cow. But I can get milk, meat, they can pull more, and they're a little less delicate. That is the one reason I've never wanted a horse, is because they are more on the delicate side of animals. And I love horses, but too much. I'd rather something smaller. I like smaller animals. That's kind of what it is. The smaller for me, the better. And just more manageable around the homestead. That's kind of what it is. The bigger the animal, they tend to have their issues with certain management, and that usually comes to escaping, essentially. JS, it seems like the lifestyle, especially raising animals, is definitely a test of patience. Has it gotten easier over time with experience? For the most part, most definitely. The more experience you have, the more time you have working with animals, you get to understand their animal behavior. And because like with chickens, a lot of people, I don't want to say a lot of people, but things I've seen, heard, read, that they're like, there's no pecking order in my flock. And the pecking order is essentially you have top chicken, and then down the tier, everybody picks on everybody down the way, and then you have, the bottom of the pecking order who usually gets pecked on the most. And what can happen there actually is the pecking order is really important because, like, say you have a flock of 10 birds and for some reason they're all picking on this one bird. That can actually mean that the chicken is sick, has a disease, has a genetic issue, and many times my personal experience, when that happens, that chicken passes on at some point afterwards. I usually actually take and quarantine those birds to try to figure out what's wrong, try to, heal them because sometimes they get a little bit beat up. But the pecking order is really important, and the chicken's social construct is important because they actually help defend the flock against like sick chickens. And I know that's kind of sad that they're booting out a sick chicken, but they're not humans like us. They don't think, hey, let's make this chicken feel better. Instead, they want it out and away. And I had a friend who really tried to keep no pecking order in her flock, and she tended to have lots of issues with sick chickens. And because the chickens didn't push that bird out of the flock is kind of what I deduced and told her. I was like, so every time you have sick chickens, they start picking on a chicken, and you try to stop that when they're trying to tell you like, hey, there's something wrong with this chicken. And so it's not only that you learn to understand the way they work, but it also helps you take care of them. Because, oh, this chicken's sick, we help it feel better, it gets introduced back into the flock, and that problem is solved. But it's also learning, like, chickens like to roost as high as they can. So some people have problems with their chickens roosting in trees. And how you can either deal with that or help them get back into the roost, which means at some point you got to get them all into the roost. You got to lock them in there for a couple of days, and it like rewrites where they're supposed to sleep at night. It's kind of dealing with problems with animals and figuring out how to fix it. It makes the whole process easier because you'll notice a problem super quick and you'll be able to take care of it even quicker without kind of the mess in between. But at the same time, like, they can still be pretty stressful, like, no matter what. Kidding season, since we don't have cows or anything, but like any season where someone's having a baby is still pretty stressful because that's always kind of a up in the air scenario. Like, mostly things go pretty smooth, but when things don't go pretty smooth, it's super stressful, so you're kind of always a little bit stressed about kind of what ifs. But I've had a lot of those situations happen. I worked with those issues, and so it does help me not stress as much. Like, I can deal with stuck babies, breech babies, and all those things. You know, there's certain things that I would need a vet for, but I haven't actually had those issues for a super long time because I learned enough that many vets that I've worked with haven't worked with chickens. They haven't worked with goats. So not only are they actually learning from me, but I do get to learn a little bit from them as well. But most of the issues that I've had where I needed a vet, I can deal with. And that goes from dealing with birth problems, baby problems, certain wounds. Like I can totally like suture and sew up an animal, but if it's too much for me to deal with, of course that would require a vet. But the whole process of dealing with the hard times and figuring out what to do and how to get through that has definitely made raising animals a lot easier, but it's still a pain in the butt. Like, you can know everything about goats, you can have goats for 50 years, and you still think that goats are a pain in the butt. So I hope that answered that question okay. You're right, animals are also part of nature just like humans. Exactly. And we've separated ourselves pretty far from nature, and I think that is one issue why people do struggle with working with animals at times, is because we've moved very far beyond nature, and remembering how to deal with animals is going to take us a little while, in a sense, to me. CH, you are so awesome. I followed you for a while. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for following and joining the journey. I'm hoping to be getting into a lot more mudding here soon, but I've been kind of busy and actually recuperating from all the mud from before. But hopefully I'll get some cool projects going here soon to share. The Virginia Bushcrafter says hello to everyone in the chat. Hello to Virginia Bushcrafter. Hasma? Not sure if that's how you say that, but what are your thoughts on furries? I have no thoughts. I have no thoughts. I do not judge or anything like that, but keep it out of schools. Virginia Bushcrafter, how long have you been homesteading? So we've been homesteading and off-grid for 10 years. We were off-grid in Montana for 8, and we pretty much just got sick of homesteading with the super long, crazy winters, so we decided to move somewhere a little bit warmer. And it's also helped a lot of the stress when it comes to raising animals, because Montana, we get like Arctic cold. The last winter that we were in Montana, we had like, it was 2 times. I think it was like December, the beginning of December and like the end of January, but we had like -70s during the night. And the first time I like threw all my goats into labor, and it was a lot of insanity with all these little baby goats that I was trying to keep from freezing and bringing them inside and warming them up, and it was super insanity. So I really am glad we decided to move to Arizona to homestead, because that has really helped just dealing with the animals and being off-grid. It's made it a lot easier. And kind of getting back into the stacking method a little bit with that question, that is also something else you should definitely think about when you're going to go off-grid, is what animals, what weather you have, and how you're going to deal with that. Like, all animals are going to be able to handle pretty crazy cold weather, but we as humans can give them more comfortable spaces, but it doesn't make you worry any less. Like when those -70s hit, I'd be out there a few times a night to go check on everybody, and it was cold and it was chaotic, but that's one reason we liked Arizona, is because it stacked better. There were more benefits of being in Arizona due to weather than in Montana. We have a longer growing season in Arizona. The winters don't get as cold. There's just not the same like environmental stressors. Like, sure, it gets hot, but I'd rather deal with too hot than too cold, because Montana gets both. We get the 100 degrees in some, and then we get like the -70s. So I've dealt with both extremes, and I'd rather deal with hot than the cold, especially when the cold lasts a really long time. Is it Chigger's Keep? My concern with animals now is that I won't be able to leave my home for more than a few hours. I currently leave for seasons at a time. That is the biggest problem with being off-grid and homesteading, is that I feel the same way, and it causes me stress. And that was the same thing in Montana. It is really hard to leave for even just kind of overnight. That's definitely something you really do have to think about if you want animals, is either have a way or a setup where they can be left for a period of time, or you have someone who is fully able, capable, and understanding of these animals to watch your animals. Because something that I've never experienced, because not to be mean, but I really don't trust a lot of people with my animals, and not that they do anything wrong, but if you have someone who's babysitting your chickens who's never babysat chickens before, and a problem happens, that problem can spiral out of control pretty quickly because they don't know how to handle that situation. And so that is definitely the biggest struggle with having animals, is the ability to leave for even a short period of time. And that is definitely where you have to either make a system that works, or it's kind of one of those things. I know people who kind of do a co-op raising animals, where, you know, say you who leaves for seasons at a time, instead of exactly having your own animals, you help someone else raise animals, whether that's you go there and work with them, or maybe money wise you help feed those animals, so that at a certain point, you know, if it's chickens, you'll at least get some chicken for your contributions. I know a few people who do things that way because they are gone pretty often, or their job makes it kind of hard to have like a set schedule with the animals. So maybe that could be an idea for you, is it'll give you the opportunity to work with animals, but they're not exactly like your animals. You're just raising them, helping to work with them and keep them fed, so that you can reap some of those benefits, if that makes sense. Because it's hard to do. It's really hard to have animals and want to go do things. It's a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice that I don't mind making either, but we're all super different and have different lives, different jobs, and that is the trickiest thing. And it's just tricky. There's no kind of cut and dry answer with, you know, how you deal with that. It's just kind of figuring out what works for your life, what animals can work for your life, or what people can you work with, where you can get some knowledge and understanding of working with animals, but also, you know, maybe get some meat on your table for you. Ernie's Cabin, do you need to prepare anything before you even get an animal? Yes. So like, I'm kind of a stickler. I don't judge. But in my opinion, like, cause some people just like end up with an animal randomly. I can't judge. But I truly feel that if, say, you want chickens, not that you need to have some grand, beautiful setup, but you at least need some sort of coop. You, of course, want like the right feed, but it's the knowledge. To me, that is the most important preparedness that you need before getting an animal, is the knowledge on that animal. Because, again, I'm not trying to judge, but time and time again, I see people who get an animal and something that's totally normal freaks them out, and they try to fix what is normal, and they actually cause problems. For example, especially kind of during the pandemic, a lot of people were getting chickens, and none of them understood what a crop was. And if you don't know what a crop is in a chicken, it is the first pouch that their food goes into. So it goes from their mouth into this funny little pouch that's like up on their chest, and it kind of starts digesting there, but then is fed down into their gut system and into their gizzard for further digestion. But when a chicken is really full, they have like what looks like this funny tumor bulbous thing on the side of their neck. And during that time, I saw a lot of people saying like they were squeezing it, and then their chicken passed away, and they were trying to figure out what was wrong, and they were messing with it. And a lot of people were hurting their birds, because when you squeeze that pouch, it actually forces food and liquids up their throat, and they can actually aspirate on it. So like, it might seem super simple, but it's the knowledge that you really need, because those people didn't have what I see is basic knowledge on a chicken. They were hurting their birds. And it's not that they had a bad intent by any means. They were simply worried. And it's the same thing that chickens have like an oil gland, and people have tried to pluck them off. and it's a total normal thing. People who don't realize that turkeys have a beard, whether that's a female or a male, they can both get beards, and it's just like this funny, like to me it looks like the end of like a witch's broom, but it's just these funny little super stiff little wiry feather things, and people were trying to pull them off. And so sometimes I do get a little irritated. I try not to be, because we're all on our own learning journey. But when it comes to preparedness with getting animals, it's the book knowledge. That is where you should start. Anatomy, their breeding cycles, if they're a bird, their laying cycles. And when I say anatomy, like, you need to know their anatomy. You need to know about their bums and their lady bits and their boy bits and how to clean those bits. Because, for example, rabbits, they have it's like a, oh no, what is it called? I'm totally brain farting. They have glands right at their business that sometimes get clogged and need cleaned. And if someone's not familiar with the fact they have these glands and they need to be looked at and checked, you could have a bun who gets an impacted little spot, and it can turn into something really bad because they weren't aware of that anatomy thing. So, like, to me, a lot of problems I see people have with animals is because they're not familiar with the animal's anatomy and how they work and function. And because some animals, they can have really weird things happen. Like rabbits can have really funny colored pee sometimes, and that they can be totally healthy, but it freaks people out, and they're trying to give them medicine they don't need. And they can hurt their animal because they don't know that bunnies can have a funny colored pee. Or same thing with goats. Sometimes, especially I saw it a lot in Montana, when they pee in the snow, it turns funny colors, and you're like, oh no, what's wrong with the goat? And that can freak people out because they're not aware kind of that thing. You know, certain minerals, what they ate, can do funny things to their systems. And, you know, especially when it comes to breeding, not understanding their cycles, what it looks like when an animal is in heat, so that you can maybe remove the males, even though that doesn't always help. You know, like usually, depending on your situation, you kind of want to keep boys and girls separate. Or like we do kind of the herd scenario, so we don't unless needed. But it's also, oh, I keep losing my train of thought. There's so much I want to say, and I'm trying to say it all, but not all at the same time. So it's their breeding cycles. It's, you know, how long is gestation? You know, in goats, you can know exactly how long their gestation is, but they'll pop them out whenever they feel like it. Like they don't care about time. You'll think they were bred here, but it actually was a little bit before or a little bit after, so you're waiting for babies forever. And some people get really scared that something's wrong because they don't understand gestational cycles, like I said, the breeding cycles. And so it's really the knowledge. And again, not to judge, because we're all gonna learn differently. We're all gonna have different upbringings that make us know more or less, but it's definitely knowing the animals you're getting, because you do not only the animal a disservice, but you do you a disservice by not being more familiar with them, so that when things happen, you at least have a basic knowledge and can respond properly without possibly hurting them. That especially is true when it comes to sicknesses in animals. A lot of times, especially like Facebook groups, you'll see people, oh, what is wrong with my bird? And you'll get 50 different answers with 50 different medicines. And sometimes you'll get one answer with 50 different medicines, and people will take that advice, and because they don't quite have the knowledge, they may make the wrong choice, because it's kind of the accumulation of knowledge. You can be pretty knowledgeable about sicknesses. You can post, hey, this is happening to my chicken, this is what I think, what do you all think? And then you're able to better decipher what steps should be taken. So knowledge. If you're gonna get animals, knowledge, especially anatomy, breeding cycles, how to check their various body parts for health. Those are the number one things when it comes to raising animals, in my personal opinion. I hope that was a good answer. Dead Wolf Resistance, hello, glad to see you here. Livestock is for those who never leave home. That's kind of what it's super true. Dead Wolf Resistance says you need to be able to provide them with as comfortable life as you live. And see, I definitely agree, but at the same time, that's kind of where I was talking about, is they are also animals. They, like, I have animals that would prefer the ground, like my dogs. They have a comfy bed, but they'd rather sleep on the ground. It's definitely providing it, but it doesn't mean they'll use it. And sometimes that's a pain in the butt. Because I built my cats this cute little cat condo. Do you think they use it? Oh no. Oh no. Sometimes they just do what they want. But yes, I do agree. Grow says the turkeys are everywhere this fall. Oh, I wish we had turkeys everywhere. They're up the mountain a little more. In Montana, we had a little group of turkeys that I would throw a little bit of corn to during the winter, and I'm sad. I'm sad I don't have my little turkey buddies this year. JS, did you research quail for stacking purposes? Probably unnecessary if you have chickens. I actually really do want quail because for me they do stack really nicely. Because they are an animal that I can create kind of like an atrium or an aviary. I can create them a pretty small space. Because if you're familiar with quail, you either have to have a short type of coop or run, or it has to be pretty tall. Anywhere in between can cause some problems. And hold on, my phone is dying. Need to plug in. There we go. So I really like quail because, like I said, because they do stack really well. You can keep them in a smaller space, and it's pretty much just to keep them safe, because one of the cons to quail is that the best way to describe it is if there is a way to off themselves, they will find it and they will do it. They're the weirdest little bird. But on the good side of it, they're really easy to contain if you build the proper containment. But I love their little eggs. I love the fact that they're small. And when it comes to wanting to feed my dogs and cats raw meat, they're super perfect because they're small. I don't have to harvest like a big bird all the time for them. They're pretty dense in nutrition. I find them super cute and fun, and the ability to make them cute little kind of like aviary spaces makes them stack really nicely to me. Because for me, the only con is that they're little troublemakers who try to kill themselves all the time. And I don't know if it's just me, that has just been my experience. They will get stuck in the weirdest places that you can't imagine, or they just vanish. They're just gone. I don't know what it is about quail. Like, it could have been my bad, but they're kind of a funny, finicky little critter. And as well as it can be pretty hard to get one of the mamas to brood. But otherwise, I love quail. They stack really nice for me and what my needs would be. They're super delicious. And I really do like kind of the aviary type of aspect to them, because small, contained, easier than chickens in that fashion. And you can get great production. That's what it is too. I think it's like 6 weeks where they reach maturity to eat or to lay eggs. 6-8 weeks, I think, and that's fabulous. Really good development cycle when it comes to wanting to produce a lot. They're really great for that. So quail are definitely something that I want to get back into, but we're building up everything first since we're starting over. Because in Montana I had quail, and I also had meat rabbits, and I want to get back into the meat rabbits too, because to me they stack a lot like the chickens. Good food, good reproductive cycle and growth time, and fur. And because I like to still the tanning practice, not super great at it quite yet, but the fact that furs, and I like to make mitts and hats and things like that. So I definitely want to get back into quail again because they stack really nicely for me personally. And that's kind of the thing again about stacking, is everything's going to stack differently for certain people. Like some people, quail might stack super well because you can have those in the house. Like you can make a cute little space for your little quail, and I've seen some really cute setups and I'm a little jealous. I want one like that. But you know, they can stack really well for some people and not so much for other people. I hope that answers that question all right. Chiggers Keep. I think you and Brandon are smart having YouTube channels. I see couples with only one channel and something goes wrong, and then they only have one channel to reach out and say anything about it. Now, that's definitely one reason we have the different channels, but it's also because we are sharing two very kind of different sides of the homestead, I suppose. You know, he's doing a lot of the rain catchment and the earthworks, and I'm doing a lot of the mudding, but also over time, you know, I'll get more into chickens. You know, I was talking about hatching, kind of more the animal husbandry side of things, because like, that's not that it's like my job, but that is mostly what I do. Is I'm very much kind of the animal tender when it comes to especially like health stuff. The chickens are pretty much, they're my chickens. I'm the crazy chicken lady. But Brandon rotates the goats throughout the property because that's kind of part of his earthwork structuring. But, you know, I do the nails and check the teeth and their health and all that good stuff. But we're very much different sides of the homesteading niche, I guess. And while we could do stuff together, which hopefully at some point we'll do like a little bit more of that, but I really appreciate the separate channels because we get to share things in kind of our own views from where, like, same spot, but we get to share different views. So it's really helpful that way. And also kind of the YouTube algorithm and kind of playing the game a little bit. It helps having the separate channels. But I definitely love what we're doing, and I love being able to share my learning experiences and opinions and ideas and stuff like that. I says I was gonna talk shit, but you actually seem genuine. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, you can if you want. It's all good. We all have our opinions, man. I don't judge. I don't judge. But I appreciate that very much. Cool beans. I'm a solo dude, and there's a lot of quail running here wild. Oh, that's awesome. I should hunt quail and raise chickens or raise quail since they're all over here thriving and obviously handle the weather well. I definitely would be down for it. I'll definitely say that you don't want to get the wild quail to raise. They don't do good in captivity as far as I've been told, and I don't know if it's legal everywhere, just throwing that out there. But yeah, I mean, you could definitely do something like that. We had a friend who actually, it was kind of by accident, but she had quail. A bunch of them got loose, and they just started making babies everywhere, and she had like her own little free-ranging kind of quail army. But she would in the sense kind of hunt her own little quail versus the wild quail. So like you got some options there because quail's really good. I think it's really good meat. It makes for really good like soups and stuff like that, and it's small, you know. It's, you know, having a quail that's just like this much meat, maybe even a little less than that, versus like having a big bird to take care of, and like, you know, eat it all before it goes bad, or having enough freezer space for big birds. Quail are really great. So no matter which way you may want to do it, I definitely say go for it. Like, give it a try. I mean, the worst you'll have to do is either eat the quail because you don't like dealing with the quail, or find someone, maybe me, no, who would want those quail, because a lot of people do like quail. And quail eggs are fabulous as well. And that's in some places, quail eggs, there's a big market for quail eggs. So that's something I do maybe want to get to in the future when it comes to quail. And that can be another stacking aspect when it comes to what animals you bring onto a homestead, is what, you know, what other money can you make from those animals? And like quail are a great example because they have such a short maturity time. They'll start getting eggs that you can get tons of quail eggs. And there's restaurants, I'm sure, like I know some people who love pickled quail eggs, so I used to give them a lot of quail eggs. But there are little side hustles that you can have raising animals and help you, you know, supplement those animals. Like there was a point where I hatched enough chicks and got enough eggs that my chickens were basically free, in the sense of the money I made from that fed them, and that was fabulous. And I can't wait to get back to that point. But that is another benefit, that is, if you figure out a good enough system with those animals, you can either sell the eggs, sell babies, sell milk, make butter, that you can almost make an animal be on the freer side of things when it comes to the money input needed for those animals. And quail are definitely one of those if you're in the right demographic, the right area where there's people who want quail eggs, especially restaurants. So if you do quail or you're going to start quail, see if there's restaurants within your area who might want some quail eggs, because I think you can get not like a ton of money, but I think you can make a pretty penny in some places. The name of Brandon's channel is Grow Tree Organics. I think his little profile picture is like a bonsai tree. So Grow Tree Organics is Brandon's channel. JS, do you and Brandon hunt? We kinda do. Brandon did not really grow up hunting and stuff. I did grow up hunting and such. We just really haven't had the need for hunting, in the sense of we've been raising our own animals for meat instead of hunting. And that is, I have nothing against hunting. I love hunting. I have certain opinions about hunting, so to say. But I think hunting is a really important practice for a lot of people. But for us, since we have the ability to raise our own animals, we prefer to take, it's kind of like instead of eating animals from the wild nature, we're going to raise our own to take what little stress we can off of the native populations. And that's just our personal kind of aspect. But at the same time, like at some point, I do want to get a couple licenses. We need a bigger freezer though too, because it is nice to be able to go out and hunt a big animal, to have lots of meat to last us through the year. Because I do really miss wild game. Because in Montana, a lot of hunting families, lots of hunting friends, I'd go hunting with them. I really miss game meats. Like, I really miss me some good elk. And it's a little frustrating because even if I didn't go hunting, I had friends who would either gift or we'd trade meat. So I do hope at some point here soon that we'll kind of get back, or not get back, but do a little bit of hunting. Because partially I just miss it. I do miss hunting. Not that I really shot a lot of those animals, but you know, learning how to track and all that fun stuff and just hanging out waiting for something nice to cross. I do miss it. So hopefully soon. But I'm not in a rush as well because we are raising our own animals for meat. Quail egg is perfect on sushi. Ooh, I bet it is. Oh, I bet that's fabulous. Joe, you don't necessarily need a freezer. Cold pack. Not entirely sure what you mean, because for us, like when it comes to a bigger animal, we really do need a bigger freezer. I do a lot of canning, but even then, just like space constraints, whether, because like I will salt preserve, I will smoke preserve, I will dehydrate. One day maybe a freeze dryer, but for right now we do kind of rely on our freezer for a decent chunk of our meat preservation, at least until a certain point. Because again, we were in Montana and we were pretty set up and I probably could have handled more then. But now that we've started over, it's, you know, we started over. I got to start small, can't have too much meat at once. I was almost in trouble at one point, too much in the freezer. The dogs ate well that day. We'll say that. JS, I have family that hunts. My brother-in-law shares the meat, but I lean more on the side of raising animals. I dig it. Yeah. And that's essentially how we are too. We definitely lean more towards like raising our own animals, but like hunting is awesome. And I'm trying to think of how to like word this. So like I'm in Arizona and hunting restrictions down here are tight, and I love it because I have never seen such beautiful, like, I mean, the antelope down here, pronghorn, are beautiful. Like, they are so shiny and golden and sparkly. They already look like a mythical creature, but down here, they take the cake, you know, and that kind of confused me a little bit because I was thinking Arizona, it's a little more, the desert conditions are more intense. So I was expecting a little bit more kind of scraggly, maybe. But then I started really learning about their hunting and that kind of stuff. And like how I understand it, like that is the biggest reason these animals are so big and beautiful, is because they're a little picky on their hunting stuff. And I wish Montana would do that. Because not that we don't have big, beautiful animals, but down here, oh man, like I saw the most beautiful elk I ever did see down here. And So like I love and appreciate hunting, but I think some things could be tinkered a little bit because I've seen what that does in a positive manner for those animals. But at the same time, everybody needs to eat, and I think that we all should be able to hunt ourselves some meat if we need to eat. Cold pack is canning cued meat and oh yeah. So that's usually how I actually do meat that I can is with cold pack. I like it a lot better. And I also do a dry pack. I don't add any liquids or anything. And I bet whitetail. I have not done whitetail that way, but I bet it's super good because I did some antelope that smelled like it might be a little bit gamey, but after canning it, it was delicious. It was super good. So if I ever get my hands on some whitetail though, I will have to give it a nice can and check it out. Sula, I love Arizona. I do too. I love it. Like I was a little skeptical at first because, you know, the whole desert idea of it, but we're up in the north in the mountains, so it's pretty fabulous. Do you worry about the animals having disease? So are you talking about like wild animals or like our animals? Because either way, of course, whether it's the animals you're raising or animals that are out in nature, that is always a worry is biosecurity. And that's another kind of stacking aspect to animals to think about is the biosecurity. And I guess that's kind of a stack for any animal you get because that's how things spread is by birds for the most part, but by other animals, you know, diseases and stuff. But it's also how you manage your animals. And this isn't like a bad thing, but most animals keep their animal in one spot most of the time. Like even if your goat's free range, they always go back into the same space and area. And me personally, in my knowledge, that is actually why some people struggle so bad with maybe worms or certain sicknesses, that it's in the ground in the area they most hang out at. And that's why we rotationally graze our animals. It really helps break bacterial and parasitic type of life cycles when our animals are only on one spot for a certain amount of time before they're moved, and that spot is allowed to kind of decompose and break down, and hopefully most bad things that are in that soil will die before the animals get rotated and come back around to that spot. But biosecurity is also, you know, when you're bringing new animals onto your homestead, that for me personally, it's a month or 2 months. So if I have like my chickens and then I have some new chickens, those new chickens stay in their own space, their own area, away from my original flock for about 2 months, because a month or two, it kind of depends on what I'm looking at, because that time gives enough time for any sicknesses to show. It gives, or to develop into symptoms. It gives me time to make sure that, you know, mites aren't going to become present, or I get to, you just work with those birds by themselves to make sure they're super healthy and they don't have problems. And if they do, you're able to treat those problems before they go in with the rest of your flock. And it's the same thing with a goat or a horse or a cow. It doesn't matter. If you're going to bring a new animal onto your homestead, you need them kind of away from everything, like, you know, not like all the way away, but their own space where they are quarantined and secluded to make sure they're super healthy before you bring them onto your or bring them into the rest of the flock. But also, if you have the money, because it can be pretty expensive, to do blood draws and check for parasites, you know, just like the vet workup to make sure they're healthy. Because some things like CL in goats, I can't remember the whole little scientific name, but it's like a bacterial infection in the lymph nodes, if I remember correctly, but it won't show up for like, it could not show up for a long time, and then at some point they'll have it. So there's certain things with new animals that you may want to have a vet test for before you bring them, to be on the safe side. But otherwise, good quarantine, making sure they're super healthy, is the best way to make sure that when you're adding new animals with your animals, that you're not bringing gross stuff. And when it comes to like nature and the wild animals, it can be a little more tricky because like I have crows and ravens that when I feed my birds, they think, oh, you're feeding us too, and they come and hang out, which would be fine if I wasn't worried about the biosecurity. So I do shoo them away, but it kind of doesn't matter because they're around, they're here. There's birds that fly over and poo or just land here for a minute. You know, nature's really hard to fight against in that sense when it comes to biosecurity, but it is doing your best to keep the wild animals away from your animals. That's why we have a bird feeder kind of off yonder to try to keep the birds who want to come here over there, you know, keep them away from the other animals. But as well as, you know, healthy soils, you know, not spraying lots of chemicals and pesticides on the property, and those kinds of things will also help, you know, nature stay balanced. Because if you have good, healthy soils, you're going to have less parasites and diseases and stuff that survive in that soil. So I hope that made sense. Sula, eating them could be dangerous to your health if it's wild. That's kind of the same thing if you're eating anything, really. Like anything we eat could potentially be dangerous, especially if it's not cooked proper and that kind of aspect. But like I grew up on a lot of wild meat, and to me it tastes better, it tastes healthier, I feel healthier than a lot of meat that I actually get from the store. That is one reason we raise our animals, is because chicken from the store is nasty and beef from the store doesn't look like it was ever alive. And that's just me, my personal kind of opinions. But I think it's really important to, of course, know what you're looking at when you're looking at meat. Very important. You know, if you, it can take a minute to become familiar when you are harvesting an animal, knowing what you're seeing and being able to decide if that meat is healthy for you to eat. And again, that's another kind of stack when it comes to bringing in animals, is knowing what their meat looks like, knowing what their insides look like, what the healthy insides are supposed to look like. And for me, like if you know how to harvest a chicken and you can tell that this is a healthy chicken, its guts look healthy, that translates pretty well to almost any other animal. If their liver looks good, you know what a good liver looks like, you know what a good heart looks like, you know what a good spleen looks like. A spleen in a goat was a new one to me a while ago. I had never like really looked at a spleen. Like I knew it was there, I knew where it was, and it just went to like the dogs and the chickens and stuff. So I never like really looked at like a real one from my goat, and I did, and it was super weird looking and I was almost weirded out. But it was actually a super healthy spleen. So sometimes you do like miss certain things through a learning process, but it's knowing how to tell when things are or aren't healthy. And of course, like my opinion is, when in doubt, you throw it out. Not that we actually throw it away, it goes into the compost or something like that. But it is very important to know when your meats and stuff are healthy. And that it will be helpful for you through the raising of animals process, because I do my own necropsies. As in, if I have an animal pass away from something that I'm not sure of, I'm able to look on the inside and have a decent opinion on what happened, and if I need to treat my animals, or if this was like a fluke or genetic. I mean, 90% of the time it's a heart attack, which usually I can tell from the outside because I'll have purple cones. It'll be very sudden. And that kind of thing. But if it's like a sick chicken who I try to make feel better and they pass away anyway, not that I can do blood work in the sense, but usually if you look on the inside, you can make a pretty good you can figure out what was wrong with them for the most part. Not always, but usually there are internal symptoms to sicknesses that you can read and understand, but then to look and identify at like the real thing. JS, grocery store meats, fruits, and veggies have no taste anymore. Scary stuff, but at least more people are becoming aware of this. Dude, I agree so much. Fruits and vegetables from the store are so bland. And essentially that's just because we you know, we've forgotten that we used to eat seasonally. There used to not be strawberries year round, but because we need lots of food to grow super fast, it makes them super tasteless, just terribly, and it's sad. That's why I love growing my own celery, because you want a really good soup, you need some really yummy celery. I know that's kind of silly, but like, I love chicken noodle soup. But I only want chicken noodle soup with like homegrown celery. Otherwise, it's just not the same and it's flavorless. But it is really good that more people are thinking about this, wanting to grow their own food, raising their own animals. Usually the only hindrance is either the lack of knowledge or, as someone said before, it's intimidating, which I totally understand. But it's a really amazing and fruitful, as long as you stick with it, process to raise your own animals, to grow your own fruits and vegetables, and everything tastes so much better, and it's so much more nutrient dense and good for you. And that's really where I stand, is I want good nutrient dense food for us, for our animals, and in a general sense for the land around us. You know, we want to create abundance everywhere. It's just a very slow process. Sula, people are demanding better. Maybe the vegetarians are better than eating supermarket meat. In Europe, it seems better here and more regulated. Yeah, here in the US, there's not a lot of food regulation, especially, it was a while ago, I went on a deep dive comparing like European foods to like America food, and it's bad. We'll just leave it as bad. But it's kind of one of those things, like, you know, I'm not like anti-vegan vegetarian thing, but it's one of those hard things that I struggle with talking to people about a little bit, because if everybody was a vegetarian, we'd have to wipe out so much ecosystem to grow all that food, thus hurting all the animals from those ecosystems. And to me, we just need to find a better balance between how much we're eating, when we're eating. We need to eat more native foods. We need to eat more, my opinion, I think we need to eat more seasonally. I feel that there should be more community farms, more community-oriented food growing systems, so that food isn't coming from halfway across the world, where it only took it 20 minutes to get here, 10 minutes on the grill, and bam, it's on your plate. Like, for me personally, I think food should be close. Food should be from your area and where you're from-ish, you know, and I think that would solve a lot of kind of the not good food problems. If food was more local, and just my personal opinion, more regulated in what we're putting in it. Because, you know, some of those ingredients in certain food has nothing to do with the food, but it's about that food being able to extrude through a machine. To, you know, I'm trying to think of like an example, like Twinkies. You know, the filling stuff in a Twinkie is like all junk, and half of that junk is just so it can perfectly be extruded out the little thing that fills the Twinkie. It has nothing to do with flavor or preserving. It's just to make sure it goes through the machine. So we're like eating machine lubricants or something like that. In that sense. So there's a lot of weird stuff we put in food that has nothing to do with the food, and it annoys me. Joe, you live the same lifestyle as we do. I subscribed. You're great. Oh, I appreciate the subscribe very much. I love this lifestyle, and I personally want everybody to live this lifestyle to at least some degree, because it's amazing. And not because I think you should, because you should, but because it's freeing. I really feel, even on a small scale, raising some of your own food, raising a couple of animals to eat, that little bit of freedom, I think, is super worth a lot of the stresses that come with being off-grid and just homesteading. I love steak. What is your opinion on vat-grown beef and chicken? Have you seen it? Seems toxic and bad for health. See, if it weren't for the fact we do bad things with things that could be good, I'd be all for it. Like, if we were creating good, healthy, actual, not crazy, chemically, GMO-y, gross stuff, I wouldn't mind. Like, I wouldn't be exactly against it. But because we do stuff for the wrong reason, I'm not exactly for it. But it could be a good idea if we do good things with it, but made it good and not weird, I guess. All right, well, I'm gonna have to let you all go, actually. My phone decided that it was gonna die, and I don't have another battery charged. So, I'm going to cut this live short. Well, not short, it's been pretty long, but we're going to end this live today. And just to kind of recap, stacking on a homestead I think is really important. To find your pros, find your cons, compare those things, and decide how well it's going to work for you on your homestead. Because if you don't do those kinds of things beforehand, you may get really frustrated and overwhelmed with what those things are going to require of you to raise and take care of them. And I think the most important thing, if you're going to bring anything onto the property, is proper knowledge. Just read as much as you can, because you're not going to know until you get hands-on with it. But that book knowledge is going to take you pretty far when it comes to bringing new things onto the homestead. I really appreciate everybody who came to this live today. Shoot any comments or whatever about maybe something else that I could talk about or explain, or my opinions on it. I just need more live ideas from those who are curious about whatever homesteady thing that it is. So again, I appreciate you all for stopping in, and hopefully soon I'll have a mud video out, and next week we'll have another live. So I hope you all have a fabulous day, and I'm so glad I live in Arizona where we no longer have the time change. So I hope you all adjust to the time change very well, and happy late Halloween, y'all. Peace.